Hello, people. I finished a book last night, continuing with my Civil War stuff. The Army of the Potomac, Mr. Lincoln's Army. This is by the same guy, Bruce Catton, that he wrote the other book that I had just read, and he wrote the book that I'm currently reading. The other two pretty much have to do with Grant. This one is kind of McClellan. Same shit, a lot of politics involved, butting into, what these guys are trying to do. But McClellan's a very different man than Grant is. Very different. Bruce Catton uses letters that, he uses a lot of first-hand accounts, but he also takes letters that, like Grant wrote to Lincoln or Grant wrote to somebody else, and he does the same thing with McClellan, and they're very different people. At one point in the book, I was convinced that McClellan was insane, because he writes some weird shit, and he's lucky that they did shit can him at the end of the book, and he's lucky he didn't get fired a lot sooner. Bruce Catton kind of he follows the same little procedure in his books. He ends the book with a big battle. With that first Grant book, he ended it with Vicksburg, and with this book, it ends at Antietam. And Antietam is pretty bloody. My first note here, yes, the contrast between McClellan and Grant. After that first book, I really liked, not only did I think that Grant was, I don't know if I'd say he was brilliant, but he's a very workmanlike general. And McClellan, I think, just got fucking lucky. How the hell McClellan got in the place that he was in the first place, why the soldiers loved him the way that they did, I don't know. McClellan he sounds a little bit like Trump in one of the letters where McClellan actually thinks that he's been chosen, by some kind of a deity to lead the armies and to save the Union. I don't recall Grant getting religious in any of his letters. And finally, in this book, Bruce Catton talks a little bit about weapons and what exactly they're using. And my note here says, after 562 pages of Bruce Catton, he finally identifies a model of rifle. And that particular model was a regiment that came out of New England somewhere, and they had money, and they had equipped themselves with Enfields from England. We got even more contrast with Grant, and I don't know what I mean there. Only I noticed one thing that Grant at Shiloh. Grant kind of gets surprised at Shiloh, and his headquarters is a little ways away, but he can hear the battle. And as soon as he hears it, he rushes to the front and starts organizing shit. McClellan will not go to the front. Okay, you guys be quiet because I'm making a video.
Okay.
Yeah, McClellan avoided the front during a battle. You can walk through.
Okay.
Just.
Sorry.
McClellan was repulsed at Richmond. McClellan had to fight Lee. And Lee, was probably one of the better Confederate generals. He wastes an entire year, McClellan. And my note here says, as I'm reading this, McClellan seems to be insane. The third paragraph. Yeah, this is just a little bit about what it was like to fight a war with a musket. The basic, all-important weapon, of course, was the infantry musket, and the standard of the war was the rifled Springfield. This was a muzzle loader with an involved procedure for loading. Drill on the target range began with the command, load in 9 times. Load. The 9 times meant that 9 separate and distinct operations were involved in loading a piece. Recruits were trained to do it by the numbers. The cartridge was a paper cylinder encasing a soft lead bullet and a charge of powder. The soldier bit off one end of the paper, poured the powder down the barrel, rammed the bullet down with his ramrod, cocked the heavy hammer with his thumb, and had a percussion cap on the nipple to ignite the charge. Just a little bit about that. If people wanted to get out of the service, if they wanted to be passed up, they would actually knock their front teeth out. I hadn't read about that in any of these books, but it happened in Europe. They would knock their front teeth out. Also, while you were advancing, you're firing while you're standing up. Guys would take the ramrod, stick it in the ground, fire, move forward. They would be so nervous and shit that they would forget the ramrod. For most rifles, these caps came in long rolls, which were inserted in a spring and cogwheel device in the breech, exactly like the rolls for a child's cap pistol today. This note says some of McClellan's men, they're camping on a field where the Confederates have just left. They find an envelope there, and inside the envelope are the dispositions of Lee's army, how they're separated. It's actually the document is rolled around a cigar. Nobody ever says what happens to that cigar. Somebody probably smoked it, but so he gets the entire dispositions of Lee's army. Lee's army is separated. He can tell at a glance that he outnumbers Lee, but it doesn't matter because McClellan believes this guy Pinkerton, and the whole time he goes through this battle, Antietam, he goes through the battle thinking that he's outnumbered. And my note here is, how will he manage to fuck this up? He's got all the information he needs. He doesn't really fuck it up, but Antietam, the difference between Grant and McClellan is Grant wanted to destroy armies. McClellan had his chance to destroy Lee's army at Antietam. It would have been bloody either way, but he doesn't do it. He chickens out at the end. He doesn't send his reserve in. He's got 10,000 men just sitting there. Oh, my note here says, some things never change, the good Samaritans abound. And you can always tell when a battle is starting to go poorly. The same thing happened to the army at Waterloo. When things started to go bad for the Allied army at Waterloo, and somebody was wounded, man, there was no shortage of people to help carry that wounded guy because they knew that they were going to get out of the fight. And the same thing happened at Antietam. My last note here, Grant would have won this battle. Technically, McClellan won the battle, only because the Union troops held the field. Lee ended up retreating. Grant wanted to destroy enemy armies. McClellan held the field. After this battle, McClellan gets fired, and they give the force to Burnside. So I don't know how Burnside ends up doing, but I'm gonna find out. The one I'm reading now is called Grant Takes Command. I'm only about 14 pages into that one. So thank you.